Have you ever begun budgeting for a trip and can't figure out how much you should be spending on your hotel? What about activities and food and drink? Travel budgeting can be stressful, especially when you don't have a solid benchmark for how much you should be spending to get the most out of your trip. Today we narrow this down for you. Keep listening for our take on travel styles and how knowing yours can make budgeting much more manageable.
Welcome to the Travel More Podcast.
Each episode, we share custom itineraries, travel hacks, expert advice, and even stories of our past travel failures to help you level up your travel game.
I'm Shelly, a lover of plans, itineraries, and cheap flights. I'm an expert deal finder with one eye always on the budget.
And I'm Bruce, the improviser, ready to pick up where plans fail to turn letdowns into unexpected trip favorites. We're here to bust through barriers that stop you from making your travel dreams a reality.
So book that flight, buy the tickets, and say hello to your next adventure.
This is the Travel More Podcast. Welcome back to the Travel More Podcast.
Welcome.
So today we're diving into travel styles.
Yeah, we've mentioned travel styles a couple of times, kind of like in passing. We mentioned it last or 2 weeks ago with the couples travel, and we were kind of like, make sure they align, you know. But then we realized we hadn't talked too much about travel styles.
No, I don't think we've ever kind of taken our own stab at defining what a travel style is. I think you could search up travel styles and find like different approaches to what that means. Like, what kind of traveler are you?
Right. I think it's really important, though, to kind of nail that down. And this can change. So, like, I was just reading it being like, like, we do a lot of these different trips. And we kind of change our travel style depending on the type of trip we're trying to have. So it's important to know that this isn't like a badge you wear forever. But it's important to know, like, what type of goal you're looking for in your trip, because I think it helps you create your itinerary, find your destination, also communicate those goals with the person you're traveling with so that you're on the same page. So I just think it's good overall.
Yeah, I think it's nice to know. I mean, honestly, it's the same reason people like personality quizzes or anything that kind of gives you somewhat of a label, you know, that gives you a sense of where am I at with this? And once you know that, you can start to get a better sense of what you should be spending on things.
Also, I think that by knowing your travel style, you can also find people who are aligned in that travel style to kind of take advice from. You know what I mean? So like, as opposed to, you know, just Googling and finding 15,000 bloggers in the first 10 minutes, if you find somebody that really kind of aligns to your own travel style, I feel like it's easier to take their advice.
Oh, I agree. You want to know if you're a backpacker, obviously you're not going to go to people who are staying at all-inclusives or luxury travel. You want to find somebody who's doing that.
Right. Because also, like, the things they find that they think are cool are probably things that you're going to think are cool.
Right.
So it kind of goes back to your, like, personality test.
Yeah, they go hand in hand. And that's
Right.
it goes with our last episode too, or like specifically for couples. So not only do you want to know what the style is and the preference of the people you're traveling with, but then think about in your search, you know, when you're looking online for these type of things.
Yeah,
it's
right.
helpful.
So we have to tell you how we came up with this, which is that I was doing one of my many travel searches, and I came across a random blog that I won't mention because it may be amazing for a lot of reasons, but it had a very strange breakdown of how much money you should spend on each piece of an itinerary. So let me just give you some examples. So this is a $5,000 trip in Europe for 30 days. But of course, so that's going to be like a backpacking trip, which is totally fine. So they had lodging as 15% of that budget, which is $750, which is $25 a day. And listen, I know you can find hostels for $25 a day, especially if you get to like Eastern Europe. But then they were like, oh, but you can get it even cheaper if you stay at hostels. And I was like, where else are you staying?
Yeah, that was the part of it where I'm like, wait a second. Like $25 a day is already hostel, like low end for some of them, depending on where you're at.
For anything in like Western Europe, like, and then most of Central Europe, I would say. Only a few destinations, I think. Can you really get lower than $25?
Well, and I mean, then you got to ask yourself, like, do you really want to be staying in the cheapest hostel option everywhere you're going? Yeah. So already, like, the number seems off. Like
15% is low. That's like extreme, and in my opinion, like, that's wildly low, even for a backpacker. Also because I think they had something like almost 10% for souvenirs. And if you're a backpacker, like, you're not really carrying souvenirs.
You're journaling and taking photos and having experiences. Like, I don't know that that's...
And they had like almost 30%, I think, for food. And like food is a big chunk of a backpacker's, but it just seems really off. It's like you're going to spend only 15%, 750 days. That's consistently finding those $25 a night too. That's not like, oh, I found a couple of $25 a night hostels with 10 beds in a room.
Right, and I know when you found this, I asked you, like, when was this written? 2002 or something? You know what I mean? Because I was like, but it's recent, too, so...
Yeah, I don't think it had a date, but it had some mentions of things that made me feel like it was more recent. I forget exactly what it was. But also, the other kind of crazy thing that it brought up was, it said it was, like, going into, like, how much should you spend of your, like, personal income on travel, which of course is always going to be.
Oh, yeah, this was the overall, like, yeah, do this breakdown.
So they said for someone making $60,000 a year and then clearing $39,000, so they're taking out taxes and retirement and things just off the top, in the U.S. No debt, so you don't have to put any money towards debt.
Yeah, okay.
Then they said that you can spend $7,800 a year on vacations, which was like 20% of your overall take-home pay, which again was just wild. Like that, I mean, listen, that's awesome if you could do that, but...
Well, right, because I was doing, like, what do they say? You want to spend about a third of your income on your housing, rent, or mortgage, or whatever.
Yeah, I think this person broke it down to 50% on all of your bills.
Okay. Well, I was still going to say, because even with this budget, with traveling, with having like the 7,800, they were, you know, it was like about $780 a month you're paying for housing. So I'm like, maybe if you're, you have roommates and you're like splitting up an apartment, but...
Yeah, that's wild.
Anyway, I mean, what we're getting at here is that if you just start searching around, you might find things that will throw you down a rabbit hole that I don't know that's so helpful.
Yeah.
You know, so it's today we're going to try to give you, you know, some like landmark ideas about, one, what's your travel style for the trip you're trying to take, or in general, what are the kind of things you want to do, and what are the ultimate goals, and then where are we going to, where are you going to spend most of your money?
Right. All right. So let's break this down.
Let's do it. So we've broken these categories down, and of course, you know, you could do this a lot of different ways. I think Shelly and I came up with ones that capture the majority of the options. First one we have is relaxation travel. So really, people who are doing this, it's all about that natural reset. Your beach vacations, your maybe staying in one place, rent a lake house kind of thing.
All inclusive.
All inclusive. Sometimes cruises, stuff that, you know, it's not the kind of trip that you need a vacation after you take it.
Right.
Which we've included those as well.
Right. Going along with that same kind of vibe is a wellness vacation. So people who want this vacation are kind of like finding rejuvenation. So it's like a little different than relaxation because it has like focused wellness additions. So things like yoga, clean eating, fitness, like it definitely centers around the wellness, as opposed to like a relaxation vacation or like style would literally just be like, I'm going to go sit on the beach, where a wellness would be like, I'm going on a retreat.
Right.
You know, so they're very similar, but they're just a little different because one's a little more focused.
Sure, and it has a little more like health activities tied to it specifically.
Exactly.
So then we've got, on the opposite end of that, would be adventurer. So this is the one where you need a vacation after you're done with this. Yeah. So traveling, you know, to getting outdoors, finding adventure. Essentially, you have the goal of like getting outside as much as possible, and maybe even going after an adrenaline rush type of situation. So trekking, you know, any kind of expedition type travel.
White river rafting.
Kind
of the next is the backpacker. So we talked about this a little bit before, but the main goal here is longevity. It's like, how long can I continue to travel? And the longer the better. So really you're spending as least amount of money as possible to make sure that you can continue to travel longer.
Right. So it's like creature comforts, luxury, things like that go by the wayside for the ability to spread a budget as far as possibly and as possible as is possible. And the goal, you know, this is where if you're not the kind of person that's willing to couch surf or, you know, just be in communal situations, that's maybe not your style.
Right. The next is culinary. I think this is probably the least popular on the list because it's a very like niche type trip. But these vacations are all about the food and drink, so much so that it's usually like you're going to this place to experience the culinary scene of the place.
Right.
So it's not that you just happen upon it and you're like, oh, like this place has a lot of nice restaurants. It's like, no, I'm going to Italy or I'm going to Thailand to have the food. So you're all about the local food, like street tours and cooking classes potentially, and you may even go to like farms to see how things are harvested and grown. Like it's really all about kind of the food and how it's prepped and prepared and those kinds of things.
Yeah, having those experiences. So definitely be prepared to pay for those types of excursions and things. Right. And then we've got city roamers, which Shelly and I like to think of ourselves as primarily this type of, we would call it adventure too, but for the sake of having a different name, because usually adventure travel has to do with like the outdoors and adrenaline rush and expedition like that. So we're going to go with city roamers. It's definitely like a get up and go type of touring and soaking up everything you can, finding every nook and cranny of a place. And the overall goal here is to get as much culture and local life as possible.
Yeah. And then last but not least, we have our luxury folks. So they're staying at nice hotels, making reservations at the nicest restaurants, sleeping in with room service. So this is almost a little bit of a mix with the beach vacation. So kind of similar, like city roamers is like a little bit of adventure. Luxury is a little bit of relaxation too, because you're definitely not getting up and going all the time. But you are going to do things like go to museums or go to guided tours. But you're definitely going to do it in a nice way.
Yeah, I think the key with luxury is that you could almost, with the exception of backpacker, you could kind of have a luxury style vacation and do adventurous things, do city roaming type things, culinary, whatever. But ultimately, you're paying for like maximum comfort and luxury. So you're not taking a group tour, you're taking a private tour.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Even then, like I'm thinking, so we'll go into like a little bit of where we fall. I know we already said city roamers, but we can give you examples of like other trips that have fallen into other categories. But I always think of like the African safari, which is a lot of like bucket list things. There's a difference from a luxury safari than there is just like a safari, like an adventure safari. And it's not only in the things like the accommodations, but I feel like it's the literal style of the safari. Do you know what I mean? Like,
yes.
When we went on safari, we were literally waking up at like 5 a.m. and going to bed at 10 p.m. And that's like a fairly good amount of sleep. But like it just, it's all day.
Well, it's fast paced.
Yeah, we got almost no downtime. For how long we were there, like 16 days.
15 days, yeah.
Yeah, and our guide literally was like, you'll sleep on the plane. So, like, that's the adventure style. But luxury, we met a couple of people who, they didn't drive anywhere. They took, like, bush planes everywhere.
Right.
That's a much different experience. Even just the fact that you're taking a plane versus driving, like, that means you're sleeping in. You're getting to, like, wake up and go, and it's like an hour bush plane as opposed to like what could be a 6-7 hour car ride. So it's different all the way.
Yes, it's like you can almost take any of the other styles to a degree and turn it into luxury when you pay for extra time, faster travel, more premium travel, etc. Because it's just making things easier.
Yeah.
But not necessarily better.
No.
I would say, but it's definitely just, you need to have the money for it. But sometimes it's nice to experience luxury. And I always like to think, when I look at this category, I've never thought I'm going to pay for that. But having done points and miles and like travel hacking, now.
You're thinking maybe one day?
Well, we've already had a chance to experience luxury.
Well, in our flight.
Listen, that was amazing.
Yeah.
I still, like, laying down, yes. It was like a 5-course meal. Who needs that?
Hey,
That's
so
ultimately.
So speaking of that, so you're bringing up a good point, which is going to transition us into like why we're talking about these categories today, which is the budgeting.
Yes.
So we're actually not going to talk about transportation. So getting to your destination, we're going to leave that completely off the table. And the reason for that is for almost everything, maybe minus luxury, you're probably going to pay the same for your plane ticket because everyone's just going to buy a standard plane ticket. You know what I mean? So
right.
like, it's not like the percentage is there. It's like it costs what it costs.
Yeah, it costs what it costs. And your transportation to get where you're trying to go is going to be determined by from where you're going, where you're traveling from, and where you're going to. And like Shelly's saying, if you follow our advice too, if you're going to take a regular type of flight, you're not upgrading or doing points and miles. The best thing to do is just find a way to find cheap flights, like Scott's cheap flights, going, etc. But that price is kind of like.
But even if you are doing points and miles, I still would say that like that doesn't really have a category in your like budget spending. I mean, obviously it does for your overall budget, but like that price is what it is. Like there's just, you either getting it free because you can do points and miles, or you're paying what it costs to get there. Like there's just not a lot. It's like a Disney World ticket thing where it's like, well, like it's just a number. It's not a variable. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah,
it's a fixed expense. It's not really variable.
Right. So it's like once you find that out, then you figure out the rest of the money that you'd like to spend. The rest of these categories are
a lot more variable.
Yeah, they're variable. Like we could talk about percentages or which is the biggest category.
Yeah. So to give you an example really quickly of some of these categories in action, at least with our trips and how they've fallen, we've taken the most amount of trips in the relaxation category, sort of, the adventurer category for sure.
Yeah, wait a second.
I'm getting there. And the city roamers for sure. So when I say relaxation, I would consider the 3 cruises we've taken to be in the relaxation because it's forced relaxation. And yes, I know that we would get off the boat and tour, as soon as we could get off to when we get back on. But
it was way more relaxed.
There's a lot more like sea days and things where like you have to just be on the boat. And so that's a lot of downtime. And so for me, I would say that's a relaxation, vacation. So any cruise vacation fall into that, all inclusive also, which we are going to talk about a little bit later. And then the adventurer, we have quite a few of those. So that would be our African safari would be an adventurer trip. Mm-hmm. Our trip to Norway, I think, would fall into that adventurer category.
Yeah, for sure.
Even more than city roamer because we really did focus on the outdoors. And we did a lot of kayaking trips and things like that.
Even like when we went to the White Mountains to hike.
Oh, yeah.
That was specifically an adventure trip.
Yeah, and actually when we went to Lake George and went white river rafting.
Yep. That
was definitely an adventure trip. So we do quite a few of those. Oh, our whole out west road trip was adventure trip.
Definitely, because it was focused mostly on outdoor experiences, hiking, things like that.
And then city roamers is everything else. So all of our trips to major cities are going to be in our city roamers.
I guess we've never taken a trip that was just culinary focused.
No.
That's kind of like is that a newer, I feel like, but that's a thing. You could literally buy package type trips that are primarily focused on that.
So I would say that like wellness and culinary are very specific. And you're not going to just like fall into that category. Like right now I'm classifying these after the fact.
Right.
But like you would know if you went on a culinary trip or a wellness trip. You'd have no question about it.
Right. Because it would be marketed that way.
Right. All right. So let's talk budgeting. And before we go into budgeting, I keep saying that, this is actually about budgeting, which is cruises and all-inclusives.
Oh, yes.
So the only thing I wanted to say about this before we go on is you may think, if you're doing some sort of all-inclusive package, and that could even mean like an African safari or obviously like a beach all-inclusive or a cruise, you may think, oh, I've already paid for everything, so I'm good. And I'm here to tell you that's not true.
Oh, my gosh, no.
We've been on many all-inclusive things, never a beach vacation, but all of the cruises and the African safari and things like that. And it is never truly all included. Like there are always things that are going to be kind of like additional add-ons. So I'd always set aside at least 10-15% of your overall budget as kind of like this auxiliary money that you can use for whatever comes up. So like on cruises, it could be shore excursions or like additional like food and drink offerings,
spa, all the wellness things,
like a ton of those kind of things. And then for like African safari, we figured everything is included, but then we spent a considerable amount in tips.
Oh yeah, that was something. I don't know when we learned about that.
Well, we knew about it.
We did,
and I had calculated what I thought would be a good amount of tips, but then we met more people than I thought, and we did more things, and you just like. You want to have some buffer. So I always talk about the buffer, and this is what I mean. It's 10 to 15% of your trip. So don't get stuck in cruises and all-inclusive assuming that you're good to go. Have some money on the side. All right. So 3 main categories of spend after transportation costs, which we're not including, is essentially food, hotels, and fun. So like that'd be like obviously tours and those kind of things. There are other things you're gonna spend in travel, but those are like the three big categories.
That's the trinity.
Yeah.
Those are the three main things.
All right, so we're gonna break it down like this. If you are these types of travelers, these travel styles, you're gonna spend the biggest percent of your travel probably on lodging. And that is luxury, relaxation, and wellness. So when we say majority, we mean somewhere in the 40 to 70% of your budget. Like it can be at the very top. So oddly enough, luxury is probably going to be closer to 40%. You'd think it'd be at the way top, but it's probably only going to be about 40% of your budget because you're going to have those high-end food, the guided tours, all those type of deals. But no matter which way, no matter how much you spend on those other things, like the Ritz-Carlton, it's going to be some of your budget, even if you do go all out for those other things. And then relaxation and wellness can get you closer to 60, 70, maybe even 80, 85, 90%.
Oh, well, definitely because of if it's all-inclusive
right.
type.
Depends on the inclusivity and the location of where you are. Because like if you're on a beach vacation, an all-inclusive beach vacation, or not even all-inclusive, let's just say you're on a beach vacation, but you really just plan on going to the beach every day, making sandwiches for the beach, like getting a 12-pack of beer and sitting on the beach.
Yep.
And maybe one day you're going to go into town to like go out to eat. Like, you know what I mean? But it's mostly just we're hanging out on the beach.
It's the place.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, even thinking like African safari luxury style or even other types of tours. Like you look at, I remember we were looking at Egyptian cruises on the, or, just the package of going to Egypt. They're almost always, you see the same things until you want to do luxury accommodation. And then your price like triples or more. So really lodging is what I think brings the price up for those categories.
Yeah, for sure.
So next up, we've got food as the main category, which definitely Shelly just smiled at me. She's like, yep. I'm like, I definitely think if we broke down our budgets, like we do everything we can to get lodging and transportation, everything super small. So then like 90% of our
I literally
budget.
wrote, for Bruce and I will easily spend 40 to 50% of our total
easily.
budget.
Easily.
On food and drinks.
So
it adds up.
It does add up. But like the travel styles we'd say that you should expect to spend the most on food are obviously culinary.
Yeah.
Because that's, I mean, you could almost argue that culinary's fun costs
is
are
also food. Yeah, that's
so
true.
it's like their not expeditions, but your excursions, your classes, your tours of a vineyard or like
that's true.
That kind of stuff. So, and then backpackers, I'd probably say food would make up a good amount because you're trying to really save on lodging and fun is hopefully free or to some degree like cheap.
Yeah.
And then most of your money is probably going to be just trying to find ways to feed yourself, even if it's cheaply. And then I think the city roamer definitely, if you're trying to explore an adventure, you're probably not staying in your accommodation very much.
Right.
So you're not necessarily you don't want to spend a lot of money on a hotel room that's mostly just a bed and a shower.
Right. And like fun, like Bruce and I will do stuff every once in a while, but I think a lot of the city roamer piece to this is that you're kind of just exploring the city. And because you're going so fast, you're probably not staying in that city too long. And therefore, like, you're not spending a ton of money on, like, the fun money because you're just, like, getting your, like, taste of, Porto and then moving on.
Right. And I would say, like, when Shelly and I have done this, sometimes we have an activity that we've lined up. Other times we stumble into things and we're judicial with it. I would say the most of the money we definitely spend is on what we're eating, because we're pretty much eating out all meals. We're not necessarily cooking. Sometimes we do though. It's
pretty rare.
I would say the only time we've probably cooked, I would actually say the trip is less like a city roamer trip.
Yeah, more adventure.
More towards an adventure.
That's actually very
backpacking.
true.
Yep.
Yeah.
Like in Norway.
Yeah, Norway, or all of our camping trips, obviously,
Yep.
we're like camping on the fire or cooking on the fire. So yeah, that's actually true. Our adventurer ones. Speaking of adventurer, here's where our fun money comes in.
Yes.
Our adventurer people. So they're our lone category and the people who are going to spend the most on fun. And they aren't all the same because adventurers can spend a ton on things like white river rafting or like kayaking day trips or like, those types of things where you're paying a guide and you're going for these all day adventures. But you can also be extremely low budget and with the fun, and spend most of the time just hiking or renting equipment for the week, which is usually a lot lower cost, things like that. In which case, food's probably going to be your highest expense. So it kind of depends on what type of adventure you're going on.
Yeah, what type, and also maybe if you already have the equipment you need, you know what I mean?
That's
like
another big
like
one.
Lake House, I'm thinking,
Right.
And then you're really just mostly buying food after you bought the place. Yep.
And then conversely, city roamers and luxury can go all in with the fun category too. So like if you were a city roamer, but you like to do everything guided, then you could be spending a significant chunk of your money on the food. And same with luxury. If everything's going to be private tours and exclusive experiences, then yours can get pretty up there too.
Yeah, or even you go somewhere because you want to go to every museum and they all cost money, or you maybe music and performance, and you know you're going somewhere to see, like, you know, so you're putting all your money into that.
Like you're
if
going to New York.
That's what I was about to say. If we didn't live so close to New York, we absolutely would take a trip to see as many Broadway shows and plays as possible.
I actually have people that I know from my hometown of Memphis, and they go, once or maybe twice a year. And when they go for a week, they see like 10 shows or something. Like they see a show.
Like everything that's...
Like every matinee, they're booked for some week. So obviously that person is going to be really far in the fun category. But that's like a very specific type of trip. That kind of, in my opinion, goes along with like culinary wellness, where it's like you're going for something very specific.
Yeah, I know when we were talking about this, I was like, well, what about cultural? And I do think wellness and culinary are getting towards that specific. It's almost like the specific category. You know, like I'm going because I want to see these things.
Right. And then, of course, that's what you're going to spend your money on. So that'll change things,
it's like
too.
going to Porto or the region around it in Portugal just to see winery, or all the wine and like port wine. And you're lining up all the tours and you're taking excursions just for that. So.
And, the one that we didn't mention, but is like really on the rise right now, which I wish I had the time. And we have a lot of time off, but I still don't have the time to do this, which is slow travel. So that's the idea of like spending a good amount of time. Usually it's like multiple weeks, even like more than a month, in one location. So like renting an Airbnb or like a home share and literally staying there and kind of living like a local for however long. And in that case, like your budget's probably going to be actually pretty evenly split. Like straight up 30-30-30 because of like you're probably cooking and your fun activities. You probably are taking like little day tours and things like that, but not super often, because you have a long time there. So yeah, slow travel. I wish I had the time for that.
Right.
I have a lot of time and I still that's a lot of time.
Well, I think the only people who really do slow travel are probably retired, maybe have virtual, flexible jobs.
I think the virtual jobs is what has it on the rise right now.
That's the biggest one. It was funny because I just read somebody's blog about slow travel, and they're like, we move to another city every like 6 months. I'm like, that's not travel. That's just moving around. At what point is it just like,
you just live somewhere else? Yeah.
It's just called living somewhere temporarily.
That's
Anyway.
That's such a good point.
It's a little silly. So.
What is the difference? We should put that as a poll. What's the difference between slow travel
I do want to
just
hear this. Yeah.
like generally moving? Like, what do you consider yourself living in a place versus visiting?
And I always think it's kind of funny when people are like, "Oh, I want to be like the locals. I want to live like the local." And I'm like, "But do you?" Like that's most people when they
just
live,
like have their routine.
They get up, they have their coffee, whatever. They go to work.
Yeah.
It's like they wish they were on vacation.
Yeah.
I just think it's an interesting idea. What I do like as a trend is being considerate about what you do and where you go when you travel and how you're supporting
the local business.
the local.
I agree.
Is it supporting and contributing to the people in the area, or is it not? Is probably the best question you can ask yourself.
Yeah, we do like to stick a lot with local things as much as possible. So like even staying away from kind of any chains that we see. It doesn't always happen, but as much as we can. But going back to your like live like a local, actually you reminded me when we lived in Florida, and I vacationed like an hour from where we ended up living every single year for my whole childhood. So like this was my vacation place, essentially right down the street from where we were living in Florida. And I was so excited because we were like on the beach.
We're going to go to the beach every day.
Yeah, we were so pumped. And it was so quick that like all of the allure of like the place wore off. Because I was like, no, it's not as fun when you're at the beach and you know that you need to like switch over your laundry.
Right.
And
well,
tomorrow you go to work.
And it's
like,
not to say that people don't enjoy living on the beach, but it's not
or in
the
their
same.
places. It's just not the same. That's what my point is.
It does kind of just become like something else. So I think can anyone really travel like a local? I don't know. I don't think so.
It's interesting. You
I
can
think-
find local finds, like
Yeah,
local
I
hangouts,
think
and that's
there's
kind of fun.
Yes, and I think that's what's more interesting is like go see your landmarks. You know, like I think there's nothing wrong. Like when people, that's the other flip side. When people are like, "Oh, don't be a tourist," I'm like, everyone's a tourist unless you live there. What are you talking about? Just like be responsible. And who doesn't want to see major attractions?
My favorite people is when I see, like on, I don't know, social media, and someone is at somewhere that like is a tourist destination, like Disney World. Like
man,
no one
that's the
lives
worst.
in Disney World.
Disney people can be wild.
And they will be in the park. So I get it if like you live there and you're like the traffic tourist. That's not what they're talking about. They're talking in the park. And they're like all these tourists. I'm like, you're in a theme park.
There is no one
Like
who,
no one is from
no one
Disney.
is born here. No one even
Yeah.
dies here. They
Yeah.
ship them out, so you
Like,
can't die in Disney
It
World.
just you're not. So yeah, there's like a weird thing about who can be a better traveler and less touristy and whatever. And I think just enjoy
Sure.
yourself. That's why we like these travel styles, because it allows you, like, without judgment,
Yeah.
to determine like what do you want out of your trip.
What's your goal, right? I think that's always, what's your goal? How do you break down your budget? And when you start searching for things, if you see something that's wildly different, you might ask yourself like, is this realistic?
Yeah.
But it gets you thinking a little bit. Ultimately, yeah, going back to the local thing, I think the biggest question you could ask yourself is my travel sustainable, and is it helping the communities I'm going to or not?
Yeah.
It's a great question. So.
Yeah, always a good question to ask, and always be, always like stay curious about what you're reading online, even if it sounds like something you want to hear. Be careful not
sure.
to fall into like a little bit of confirmation bias, being like, yeah, I only need $750 for a month in Europe. You may, but you may want to just look at a couple of options before you start to
Right.
see that and be like, yeah, I can do that. You may be able to do it, but
that's like the someone who thinks it's going to cost $1,000-$1,500 to fly to Europe, and that's it, because they look at a ticket price. You know what I mean? So you gotta do some research. But even more reason why you should join our Facebook group, because if you're listening to us and
Shameless
going
plug.
like, what are you talking about? The only way we would know that is if you let us know. So definitely join. Send us an email.
and
Check
tell
out-
us which one, like, what is the deciding factor between living somewhere and visiting? Because I'm curious. Like, is there a time limit?
Yeah, when do you all of a sudden
Like, just
reside?
you've had a short-term living situation.
Right.
I wanna know what
At
the
what
difference
point
is.
are you there? So
Yeah. Anyways, thanks for listening, and we will see you next time.
see ya.
Did you know that every time you book a Disney or Universal vacation, you're paying for a service that you may not even be using?
Really?
That's right. Travel agent costs are added to your Disney or Universal vacation, whether you use one or not.
So you're telling me that I'm paying for something even though I'm not getting the help?
You got it. So next time you want to book a theme park vacation, make your money work for you. By booking with Magic Pass Travel, you'll get our expertise and years of experience without paying any extra and while supporting a small business.
Check out our show notes to find our contact information.
Can't wait to help you plan your next adventure.